For more stories like these, go to www.social-tv.co.za, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on our social mediums.
You're listening to our social newscast with me, Sam Marshall, brought to you by www.social-tv.co.za. And today we're talking to Rahma Solomon from Vortex Design on the psychological impact of remote working, but also how to design safe spaces as your teams slowly return back to the office. Rahma, thank you very much. Talk to us about the link between psychological and physical well-being.
So currently in spaces, as interior designers and architects, we've always had to be very wary of how people interact with their spaces and with each other during the day, because they do spend 8 hours at work. And psychologically, every part of the environment has an impact on basically how they feel, and then, it impacts everything that they do, whether that is their work or how they interact with other people. Because the environment, whether they're hot or cold, whether some noise in the air is irritating them, all those things play a part. So now with the current pandemic and that situation, psychologically, what's been affected is how safe they feel in their space, and how safe they feel at work or in their homes. And that has sort of had a knock-on effect psychologically to what we are facing today in workspaces.
I'm not an expert, you are, but if you've gone from a thriving, working, hustle and bustle office space that was well designed, well air conditioned, to your working environment at home, which doesn't really tick any of those boxes, could really knock you psychologically.
Yes, definitely. You basically need to go through a huge adjustment phase. Someone who is used to, let's call it background noise, who doesn't necessarily prefer to work with their earphones on, listening to music, someone who prefers to have the interaction of their colleagues, now has to deal with either immense silence in a quiet home, or dealing with the kids, or interruptions from a spouse or similar. So the big changeover is not being able to quickly look up from your desk and ask your manager for their opinion, taking the time now to change your habits. And it's the change in changing our habits that is going to be the biggest changeover now in our working environment. It's things that we've become accustomed to. Some people 5 years, 10 years, some people even 25 years. So we need to be mindful and empathetic towards at the moment.
How do we shift design? Because I've got to admit, before I got this press release, I never thought of the impact that a workspace has on kind of your mental and emotional well-being. But how do we shift design when this is not something that people are actually talking about at the moment? People aren't too focused on, obviously we focus on remote working, we're focused on the pandemic, but we're not focused on the space we're working in.
So how we've looked at it, we've looked at it from varying degrees as to, how it affects people working on the ground, people who work in offices, people who travel a lot for business, and especially some people have worked from home most of their lives. And we've tried to find the ideal balance between what works for each of those people and how did they cope in each of their environments, and is there a good balance or thread running between each of it. And actually at the center of it all is, if we can create a safe environment that has good communication, that has easy access to similar items that they had before. So if somebody needs to print, and then that information needs to be sent to their manager, and if something needs to be proofread, and if they need to collaborate with their team on a pitch for a new client. Those are the fundamental principles that sort of need to remain intact so that business can keep flowing at the same pace that it did before. So what we looked at is not necessarily remaining in the extreme of let's all stay at home, but how do we shift offices to be 100%, not 100% safe, but 100% safeguarded from human interaction to the point that people can fall ill from interacting with each other physically. So what we're proposing is re-looking at spaces where offices could be reintroduced into open plan workspaces, but not the old offices that we were used to, where everybody's got a closed door and you need to knock and make an appointment. We're thinking of spaces that possibly have sliding windows, so your manager's in the office, but there's a sliding window that remains open when there aren't a lot of people at work, and closed when the levels are a little higher. We're looking at possibly shifting people into more cubicle type workspaces so everybody isn't sitting on top of each other and facing each other every day, because we know that COVID is, it can be airborne if people are coughing or sneezing. We're looking at situations where everybody needs to be held accountable and responsible in terms of monitoring symptoms. And if everybody works together as a team, we believe that workspaces can go back to a balanced, open plan versus closed office layout. And again, people don't necessarily need to sit in clusters anymore. They can still sit in the open plan, but spaced further apart. We believe that going forward, permanent solutions from designers and architects need to be brainstormed with clients so that the solutions ultimately need to come from the end user through designers in order to populate spaces that are going to be the most effective.
So you're actually saying to me, Rahma, is that you guys at the moment are basically challenging business owners to re-look at their spaces, because it's inevitable. We are at some point going back to a normal that will see some transport back and forth from your home office to the kind of centralized office hub. And now is the time to kind of rework those spaces so it makes sense.
Definitely. If you really look at it in retrospect, we can't start purchasing a printer with toner and ink cartridges for every single employee. We can't suddenly implement high-risk security measures that law firms and financial firms have taken so many years to implement, and suddenly, get everybody high-speed internet when we know fiber is still struggling to be installed in certain neighborhoods. So certain people do still need to be accommodated in our tenant spaces. In some instances where we are installing safety protocols at the moment, we still find, the odd employee trying to come into the office just to do a print, because some people can't work in a paperless environment. So there has to be some consideration for the future that, a permanent workaround is inevitable. There are people who belong to certain firms that have been there for 30 years. You cannot replace their experience. And if you need to build an office to accommodate them, if you need to build a walkway for older individuals to, congregate on one side of the office because they have comorbidities, and that area is cleaned more regularly than a different side of the office where people are healthier with a different immune system level, those are things that people really need to look at as a long-term solution if business and the economy is going to survive.
What I understand you're saying is that it's got to be structured, it has to be engineered, and you've got to think about when you at some point go back to a normal, that the way the space has been designed, that it needs to factor in not the now, but 6, 7, 8, 9 months from now.
Definitely. We're looking at our first winter that we're living through now. The next winter is going to come along with flu symptoms and people working together. We also don't know how the virus is going to react to our different habits when we come back together into workspaces and we are congregated in one room with 10 people in a meeting, for example. So take, for example, if everybody comes back, everybody's sitting here and one person falls ill on a Monday, and they have interacted with 3 people at the printer that day. And Tuesday, you get a phone call from 3 more of your workers saying, you know what, I have the sniffles, I'm not sure. I spoke to Sarah yesterday, she was also feeling fluish. I'm a little scared. It comes down to safety protocols and risk assessment. We need to prevent the worst outcomes. So do you really want to, as a business, be saddled with the unknown? We need to assess what is the cost of not making our spaces safe enough to prevent something from happening, to rather install free printers in the office, to rather install additional hand sanitizers in each department, to rather hold your office so that they are not reliant on forming new habits, but they have spaces to go to that already, you almost have an automatic space to go to that is already taken care of and cleaned regularly on a schedule, so that it becomes the new normal. We're looking at a new way of living and a new way of working. If people are just told to keep their distance with a poster for 2 meters, or if people are told to, you know what it's like, you have a chore schedule and you need to remember to do the dishes, or you have a chore schedule and you need to remember to clean the bathroom. You know, you do it for 3 days and then after 3 days you kind of go back to your old ways. The same thing will happen when people need to wash their hands, sanitize, and stay 2 meters away. We forget. So if the space doesn't lend itself to automatic reprogramming, I do believe that we will run into problems in the future of people returning to normal habits. And it's the slightest slip. It's touching the wrong handle and then touching your phone and touching someone's calculator and borrowing a stapler. And, you know, quickly printing a document because you have a deadline. So it's all the tiny factors that we need to, you know, look at where we can mitigate our risk. And if a space is set out perfectly to, you know, at least lend itself to safety, at least if people see that it's different, at least if people are reminded every day that this is how we work now to look after ourselves, our family, and our colleagues, I believe that it will lend itself to a much safer future.
And I think the other thing that is also important to understand, and I've heard this conversation so many times, people think that once an office is deep cleaned, it stays clean.
Not a chance. We walk in and take, for example, a woman's handbag, which I mean, I'm a woman, but I'm talking from personal experience. I touch my phone and I throw it in my handbag, and that's next to my packet of tissues, and that's next to my lip balm. And then had I cleaned my phone, but I hadn't cleaned the packet of tissues that I touched 5 minutes before, I would then, you know, put my hand on the fridge, take up some milk, make a cup of coffee, and very easily I just spread germs around, you know, and think if there's a capacity of 50% women to 50% men, you know, somebody had possibly just come from a run, he'd parked his bicycle downstairs, yes, he did a quick shower and a change, but he put his belongings outside the shower, his wallet, his phone, after he had touched the bike. So where was he doing a run? Where was he exercising on his bike? All these little tiny areas that we don't think about. That again, if buildings were smarter and had sort of areas that people needed to, I wouldn't say quarantine through, but, you know, just safer zones for people to transition through in the future, like conference centers built closer into office spaces, so people didn't have necessarily meeting rooms inside their offices. Landlords could look at having conference centers inside their buildings so that people were always protected from the public. Just another layer of risk mitigation, I would say.
I think it's something that we have to consider, that the spaces that we operate in are not as safe as we think they are. Final question. I'm not a design expert. How do I look at the current space and kind of see the stuff that you're talking about? Because I almost suspect you would have to be some kind of expert to think of the flow of people, creating those safe zones.
So how we currently do it is, I wouldn't call it so much as being an expert on safety. We've partnered with occupational health and safety experts, and we currently specialize in building compliance. So it's almost become a habit for us to look at the risk, you know, when it comes to a fire risk or an aircon risk or a health and safety risk. But going forward for somebody who is in the space, who lives in the space and works in the space as an employer, just really just take the time and step back and think of everywhere where somebody would interact with somebody else and possibly what we call have a touch point. So if you are thinking of the small little things that everybody has on their desk, just get everybody to declutter. If there's something they don't need, get them to give it away to charities. If there are things that they can do on their computer, like use the calculator on their desktops or their laptops, rather do that than have calculators laying around. Give it to children who need it instead. If there are additional books and things that you haven't cleaned out of your space, now's the best time to give it away. You'll find that there's a lot of things in your drawers. If you don't need a desk drawer, don't have one. When it comes to take-a-lot parcels, open them at home. When it comes to groceries, clean it off at the door. Decant anything out of a parcel that isn't required. You know, the salty cracks don't have to be in the packet and in the box. Get rid of the box, keep it in the packet. Wherever there's crockery and cutlery in the kitchen, put it behind closed doors so that anyone who's been in the kitchen before you hasn't breathed over the crockery and cutlery. We love to display things in offices, but going forward, that's not going to be the norm. The cost of a cupboard could be 800 Rand from the local, Mr. Price home or at home, but at least it'll add another layer of protection to keeping things packed away. When it comes to where people are sitting, again, most layouts already lend themselves to 2 meters apart when people are alongside each other. So then you think of people who are sitting back to back in a layout. Consider taking additional space in the building that you have with your landlord. Landlords are also, they've lost quite a few tenants. There might be good deals available where you can take additional space and house your people in the same building on the second floor or in an adjacent space. I would really encourage businesses to, if I was leading a big team of 50 people, I would rather prefer to have them all in the same building but spread out for safety, so that if I needed, I could keep productivity at a high level and safety at a high level. So really just looking at things like that from a touch point of view and from a social distancing point of view. And windows, keep them open at all times. Keep doors open at all times. If you can have air flowing through your space, that is going to go a long way to keeping the airflow clean. Make sure that your air cons are serviced regularly and just follow up when last it's been serviced. So the quality of your air, the quality of how much space people have between them, and the quality of how often you are cleaning is going to go a long way to making sure that we keep each other safe.
That's fantastic advice. Rahma, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Make sure to get hold of us at Vortex Design Solutions if you need any more further assistance.
So that's Rahma Solomon, who is from Vortex Design, talking to us about how to safeguard your space, kind of debunking the idea that if you deep cleaned your office once, but in actual fact, it's an ongoing operational process to make sure that your staff stay safe, stay social distanced from each other.